Okay, welcome, ladies, to Red Women Talk. I'd like to welcome you to this third episode, actually, of Red Women Talk. And we are actually going to talk and discuss family violence within our communities. And I have two guests with me right now. So I would like to ask them to introduce themselves to the audience here. So first, I'm going to start with Karen. Karen, can you please introduce yourselves to our audience? Thank you.
Okay, Nidani Gu Saki Big Saki. My English name is Karen English. I'm from the Picani Nation. My dad is from Gainai. And I'm honored to be here and to be sharing.
Thank you. And our second guest is Janice. She's also from the Siksika Nation. Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Janice Dort Anikumina, Berry woman. I've worked in the community in different areas. I've worked with youth, I've worked with the women, I've worked with the men. Right now I work with the crisis, the Siksika Crisis and Victim Service as you know, first responders. I also do some facilitating. So my work experience is very broad. So with that, and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this talk show. Thank you.
So again, I'll reintroduce myself. Nadanigur Nadum Gatsistaki, Marsha Wolf Collar from the Siksika Nation. So I really believe that as Indigenous women, we need to find a space for us to talk about some of our issues and talk about some of the concerns that are impacting our communities. Not only, looking at some of the graver issues, but also to, on the talk show in the future, we will be also looking at different areas, that impact us as Indigenous women too as well. So the first question I want to ask, and maybe whoever wanted to take the lead on this, is what are some of the concerns you are seeing within your community when it comes to family violence?
I guess I could talk.
Yeah.
Well, for me, in our community, it feels like there's a lot of it almost becomes like the norm in our communities in terms of family violence, and a lot of our families because it's so common within our communities that a lot of young girls that are getting in relationships fall into that cycle, and until they really understand their worth, it just becomes the norm. I know for myself personally, I was raised in family violence, and my first relationship was very violent. So it's, even though when I was little, I said, well, no guy is ever gonna physically harm me, it ended up happening to me. So for me, it's about awareness, about sharing the stories, so that these young girls know that that is not the norm, and that that's a direct outcome of colonization, because that's not what we traditionally did. Our women were always honored and respected.
Yes, so very true. Thank you for that. Janice, what is your perspective?
I'm finding also, like with the young women that are getting into relationship, that it's just the norm. But not only that, but I'm finding that a lot of our young girls are getting more aggressive than that. So you see not only the abuse with the women, but now it's also the men. So they need to learn our traditional value of respecting each other in regards to that, and respecting yourself and really loving yourself. Like Karen, I was my first relationship was very violent. I never thought I would get into that because it was not something I was raised, but I got into a relationship that was not only that, but also there was a lot of bullying in the community. So with me, it's just like I'm forever addressing family violence and the bullying that within our community, because I know how it felt, and I know the feeling, the feeling of not feeling worthy. My self-esteem was down, my confidence was down, and I had to really work. And one of the things that really helped me through my healing process was our traditional way of life, and also learning to really pray and have that faith in our Heavenly Father. So those are some of the things that I find. I also find that there is still elder abuse. That when we talk about elder abuse, there's still abuse going on where the man is still abusing the his wife, and they're way beyond in their 60s. So you still have that, and that is from stemming from residential school, and it's passed on. But you also see that pattern going from family to family to family, from generation to generation, And so I'm also finding that the family violence that's happening within our community is also based on the couples not learning how to communicate. There's also that, that frustration, not learning how to deal with their anger. So again, those are some of the things that haven't been taught. And I think when we want to empower our women, we need to start teaching them about their self-worth, and learning about the traditional roles, because we do have a male and a female role. And women back then were really honored. And I seen that with my dad, how he, took really good care of my mom. And I see that in coming, but then there's others that I don't see that with. And I think that the family violence cases that, that I see, it has a lot to do with addictions. So the addictions and
So Karen, do you find that since the pandemic has taken place, and since I think we could safely say since March, I recently saw a news that the number of family violence cases were rising, and as a result of the isolation and of course the economy and the impacts and all that. What do you sense happening within your community?
Well, I work in the field of, I've been a social worker for 30 years, and we're doing work with kids in care right now. We're creating a group care facility here in Fort Macleod. So what I've noticed is, when I think of family violence and I think about a lot of the young kids that come off of our community, school was their way, or their way of being away from all of that violence. But now that a lot of children are home, they're witnessing more, and the apprehensions have gone up, and a lot of it pertains to family violence. So what we're seeing is there is an increase, because they're isolated at home, and there's nowhere for these young kids to go, except being at home. So I see that the need it's increasing, especially with the addictions, the opioid addictions. That's really increasing. Our mortality rate has increased so high in the last,
Yes, it has.
maybe 5 years. Like when I was younger, the death toll was not like it is now. Like in my mind, yes, there's a pandemic, but we're in crisis as Indigenous people. Our mortality rate is high right now, and no one's talking about it, and family violence is a component to that.
Yeah, exactly. Janice, what about you? Have you seen a increase in any family violence in the community?
Yes, I think, I've seen that, especially with like with right now, because of the COVID-19. I know crisis isn't really, they're taking calls, but it's the RCMPs that are attending the domestic, and looking at within a court docket, you know, you see all the charges that are being on the court docket on assault, assault. And so, like Karen said, because that was the kids that when they go to school, that was their escape. And so now you're having everybody just being in a home. And so I can imagine there's a lot of arguments and I do get calls where, you know, a lady would call and they say, you know, really frustrated. This is what's happening. My husband is drinking and trying to tell him to be safe and he's not being safe. And so all that stress that's happening within the family. And I'm finding that the women are trying to hold the family together. And then with what Karen said, you know, the amount of deaths, like it just seems like every week there's a funeral.
Yes.
You know, and it's just like and it's affecting everybody. It's affecting the whole community, you know, with all the deaths that are happening. And some of these deaths are due because of overdoses that that we're facing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I know there's so much stress happening. Okay, so where are family violence supports located within your community?
Well, in Pigani, we well, Children's Services is a service, Pigani Child and Family Services, PPCS, which is part of the House Center in Pigani. I know recently we have a few like for the homeless places for them. We have a opioid center for people who are struggling with opioid addictions. So I think with our community, we're really trying hard to keep our community healthy. Like right now, we're gonna have one of the largest food drives. It was today, so families could go and get lots of food, go drive-throughs. So I think the community is coming together more to find different ways to support because of COVID. You know, so drive-throughs, their crisis line, they have a crisis line for support. So I see the community coming together, and we have a bulletin on Picani Nation. So if anybody has any concerns or they need supports, that we can do that, and that's on Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. What about you, Janice? What are some of the family violence supports within your community right now?
I think there's under Siksika Health, and under Siksika Health, there's a lot, like with the community wellness, they're doing some Zoom, and then you have NADAP that are trying to deal with their matrix. And then we have us that we're talking to people. We have the resource center right now where they're bringing food out to the ones that are in isolation and have COVID. And so we have the line there. And then you have family service. I'm sure family service, they have their own, their own programs on how to support. And then you have the resource center that are doing Zoom, trying to teach the parenting. And then you also have social service who are doing giving out food. So you have a lot of resources that are available here, and and then, you know, health, doing the events. Like tomorrow they have that drive-through where they're doing the Christmas light, and people can just drive around. You've had the breakfast, you had the Halloween where they drive by. And so they're trying to keep those all and making sure that there's events for the community. And we're finding a lot of people are coming out. I know they're giving out turkeys right now. So there's people that have been driving in to get turkeys. So they're trying to get creative. They're trying to be creative in how to connect with the families.
Yeah,
and
that's
so,
good.
Yeah. So, and then you have Sets who's doing the Zooms, doing a program through the Zoom. And what they're doing is they're reaching out to young adults So, and I know they're planning to do something for the students, well, they're the ones that are on at home doing their work, and they wanted to do something. So they're trying to get creative in a lot of things and trying to reach.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
as much people as we can, and just keep working, at it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So how do individuals or families seek help in your community? So if a family is experiencing family violence issues, where can they go? Like, what are some of the resources that you're aware of?
Well, in Picani, I think we have a crisis line through Picani Child Family Services. We also have an RCMP station right in our community. Um, and a lot of we collaborate with Pincher Creek. There's a women's shelter in Pincher Creek where women can seek support who are fleeing homes. So we work closely with them. There's quite a few Picani Nation members that work in that center. I believe that PPCS also has and preventative services out of the house center. They also have open door and supports ongoing. But it has been difficult because of the COVID in terms of isolation. A lot of our we're doing a lot of work from home, so phone calls, Zoom meetings, those kinds of things is what we're trying to, but I really think that it's limited because
Yeah.
of the situation that we're in right now.
Yes. Yeah. What about you, Janice?
So some of the resources that we have is that we work closely with RCMP because we have the victim services. And so the victim services, they deal strictly with people who are being abused. Most of the courts are through Zoom. So they do contact the individual and then they try to work something out. We have the surrounding areas, Strathmore, when we do call, they're there to help us. Then we have, Calgary, then we have Brooks. So we have those surrounding areas. And then we have one room here. If somebody's fleeing in the middle of the night, we have this one room where a lot of people don't know where it is. Just the safety, it's there. And then first thing in the morning, we bring them to a shelter. So those are some of the things that the resources. And then we also have the opiate team that's going out just to see how they're doing. So those are the resources that we have.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear.
Right now we're really working closely with our CMP because those are the ones that are going out to these calls. And then also we work closely with the ambulance and the fire and rescue. So,
Well,
so
I think
those are, but for the reason, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think it's really important that like our audience knows where to go if they are experiencing family violence. So I think for me that it's just, it's important to talk about that and discuss, some of the options around that. Because you never know who's going to be, watching, and maybe they are in a situation where they need to, and it could be in Siksika, it could be in Bikani. We don't know where they're, but so it's good. And I think that's why it's important to ask, where can they go if they're not really sure, or who can they call, if they're not really sure about how to protect themselves. So, yeah. So, I think for me, my next question would be is what resources do you know of that are available in your community? So when we talk about like some of the resources around family violence, where can they be located if required? So maybe Karen?
Where would they be located?
Yes. I think Karen, I can't hear you. You're on mute. Yeah, you're on mute. There you go.
Okay, okay, sorry
I
about
was
that.
looking at you. I seen
I
your
was really
mouth move.
talking.
Yeah.
When you're talking resources, are you talking in terms of funding or in terms of family violence programming?
Yes, family violence programming.
Okay, so what I do know in terms of family violence programming, Big Child Family Services does the parenting program and supporting. They have an outreach program, family enhancement program that helps support families. Again, there's the partnership with Pincher Creek Women's Shelter that collaborates a lot with Begunny. We have PPCS, Begunny Prevention Services. So there's supports there that people can go to. They can even call the health center, GOPS Center in Begunny. Our community is a small community where all the programs are kind of located in a similar area.
Yeah.
So that's where most people would go, is the health center or Begunny Child Family Services or PPS to get supports. We have this place, it's called Migapi Center, that they just recently changed into second stage housing for family or women. So that's available. So I know that they're working at ensuring that there's some resources and supports for families. So those are the main places.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful to hear, especially with the second stage. I know when we were in Siksika, we were looking at doing the women's shelter. We looked at the second stage, and the success rate for the second stage is like 80%. You know, because really what you're doing is you're breaking cycles.
Yeah.
And you're really, and that's exactly what we need to do, is we need to break cycles. And so the studies were showing that when a woman goes into a second stage, they're more likely to break that cycle of violence. So yeah, so I'm really glad to hear that, you know, that resource is available for our women. Yeah. Janice?
Okay, well, some of the resources, like I mentioned, was at the resource center. They do the parenting, they do the outreach, they do a lot of programs for women in the evenings. And right now I know they're doing a lot of programs through the Zoom. Family social service, they also provide that support. And then, but most of the time there's referrals. And then most of is that over at the health, where they have the NADAP, the mental health, and the community wellness. So those, and then also the surrounding, you know, the surrounding women's shelters that we go to. So
yeah,
those are the ones that, yeah.
I do know the one in the city of Calgary. For any of our audience, I know Autan is the the First Nation Women's Shelter, I guess, in the city of Calgary. But along there are other shelters that are available, but I know they are non-Indigenous, but also do take, you know, Indigenous women too as well, and the surrounding communities like you'd mentioned. You know, so I think it's important that if you're a woman in need, especially if you're experiencing family violence, is to check with your, you know, your local or the surrounding resource supports, and knowing that you're not alone, you're never alone. And you could always reach out to the support centers or the support services within each community. And I know definitely there'll be resources there and help if needed or required. So yeah, so I think that's really important.
Oh, can I say one thing?
Yeah,
I forgot
sure.
to mention like Begunny, like in southern Alberta, like we're right next, like Kainai Women's Shelter is also a resource that women can go to, and also the YWCA Lethbridge Women's Shelter, and the Blackfoot, we have a Blackfoot second stage housing in Lethbridge as well. So we've got, you know, if people in the community, you know, we have places in the Bloods, Begunny, and in Lethbridge in southern Alberta.
Yeah. And that's so key. And I think though it's important that our women know that there is help available, and there are individuals and places that could really help families who are experiencing family violence right now. So um, I wanted to actually read you something here that I found. There was a report or a study done. It's called the Indigenous Communities and Family Violence, and maybe you have seen the report. Change in the Conversation is what it's called. So I thought it was quite interesting because it noted different topics and subheadings. So I wanted to quickly read to you, and if you could tell me what your thoughts are in regards to this. So the first one I'm going to read is called, it was regarding colonization. So what they're saying is that some of the family violence literature refers to the historical context of Indigenous people in Canada, but does not always name colonism specifically. So among those that name colonization as a factor, colonization is primarily perceived as historic rather than ongoing. It's seen as an outcome of historic marginalization. Family violence is a social issue that evolved as a consequence of social injustice and cultural oppression experienced with colonization. So Baskin 2006 emphasizes that Indigenous people themselves assert that family violence is a direct result of the colonization process. So it seeks to use GSS survey data to prove that many of the risk factors faced by Indigenous women and men are linked to colonization by finding that known risk factors cannot fully account for elevated risks. Thus, colonization may be a common factor. The unique experience of colonization of Aboriginals in Canada plays a large role in their disproportionate likelihood of violence against women. As we discussed below, others see colonization as more than just playing a large role, but being the central condition out of which interconnected forms of violence arise. So what are your thoughts about, because I know there's a discussion. I'm going to read to you another thing that they've also noted regarding different areas. So, but I want to talk to you about that, like the family violence, and kind of going a little bit deep, like a layer of why are we experiencing such high family violence in our communities? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe because we've only been in contact, especially here in Alberta, our culture and our spirituality, our women were always respected. That's part of our like Gimobits and Igakimon, like our value systems were in place pre-contact. And women weren't being abused. They were honored. They were respected. They were the givers of life. So when, from my perspective, like when the newcomers came, they had their beliefs about women, and women were already being oppressed in their communities. Women and children were being oppressed. It was in their religion. It was in their way of life. When they came to our country and they seen how we were being honored, that was one of the things that they had to break down and to take from us, is that respect we have for one another, especially the respect for women. Hence the murdered and missing women. When you think about our Indigenous women, we're more likely to be murdered or to be abused or murdered even by our spouses than the woman in Canada. It's the Indigenous woman. Yeah. So each time we walk out our door, we're more likely to die. I mean, that's something that we need to look at as living on this land. So I see every day, and I believe that it is a direct outcome of colonization, because this was not part of our values. I mean, our children were the center of our communities, and our women were respected as givers of life. That's part of our traditions, our culture. That's been taken away, and our men have been broken. Our men have forgotten what it is to be a warrior, because everything was taken from them as well. The way they protected us, the way they brought the food, all of that was taken from them. I know, so that also has brought stress, and our men have been broken. So it's about rebuilding our men to build, like our young boys, hey, teaching them to be warriors again.
Yes.
Our young girls, teaching them that it's that we are the givers of life, and celebrating them when they have their time. And all of this stuff needs to be brought back. The stuff that we're trying to do in our communities, having these cultural camps. We're starting to open up a center called Nukuwa for children in care, and it's going to be derived from our value system. So we're starting to plant seeds to break those cycles, to bring back those traditional ways, and to educate not just our own people, but the masses that, hey, let's talk about the true history. Let's talk about how Canada came to be. Let's talk about the genocide. Let's talk about everything that really happened to us. We have to start talking and not hold those secrets, right? Yeah.
Hence, Red Woman Talk.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Janice?
Okay, just to bounce off with what Karen had said, we need to teach our young people in regards to what their role is as a man, and for us as women to teach our women to respect themselves and to have that self-worth. Because even as they're growing up, from the name calling and the bullying that happens among the young girls, I mean, it really breaks down a young girl. We need to start teaching our young women to respect each other, because we are the givers of life. And I've always seen where a young girl is coming and growing up, and all the self-esteem and self-confidence, the lack they have. And I often wonder, how could that be coming from a young girl who's only 13 years old and doesn't feel no self-worth? And I know sometimes it stems from the family, it also stems from school. And I know a lot of these problems happen from the past, like Karen had mentioned, a lot of these that has happened, but they also, I think that when they introduced alcohol for here, Siksika, in 1967, there was that point where it wasn't as bad. Like there was a family violence, but not as bad as when alcohol was now introduced. So now there's a lot of family violence within the home, and I seen that growing up, with my uncles, how they would hit their wives, and I was so shocked, So those are some of the things that we have a whole history of what has happened to us. But I think also we need to know that and really take that pride that even though we've gone through so many things, that we're still really resilient to that. And I've seen so many women who have gone through the family violence, but it has really changed their lives and really made these tough decisions to leave their spouse, but for the betterment of their. And so you have all that, and that's because of the resources that are available.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
So
I think like what you're saying, Janice, is so important too, is the and Karen mentioned that, going back and some of the impacts of colonization, and I've seen it, we've all lived it, and but we also hear the stories of how we were treated, pre-contact, and how we were valued, and how like the men protected the camp itself, right? And the children. So yeah, those are some of the things I think that are really important. And um, like when I have my discussions with um, around colonization and all that, like we always talk about like the pre-contact. And for me, I think about how we, like for me, going back, like what Karen mentioned, was going back to some of the traditional, ways of life and the viewpoints and stuff, and just get in touch with some of those things that happen. And we all grew up with it, I think, especially like with our grandparents, I know with my grandmother and, our grandparents who were still connected to culture and tradition, having respect and, all that, because that's what I grew up with, was being taught that, being taught to respect your elders, and your uncles, your aunts, all of that as well. So I wanted to read another portion here. So the study also says family violence in Indigenous communities is often defined as an intergenerational problem or a cycle of intergenerational trauma. So it's noted the term intergenerational has different meanings, referring both to the intergenerational effects of violence in residential schools or of colonialism more broadly, while in other cases it refers to the way family violence directly or indirectly affects family violence of all ages. Most of the literature addresses the widespread impact of family violence on all ages within the family. However, there is a limited discussion about the way violence affects diverse kinship systems within Indigenous nations. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think when I think about intergenerational effects, as Blackfoot people, we talk a lot about quantum physics, and this is that connection that we have. So when I think about intergenerational, I think about our DNA. So I know that my great grandma, Butuayaki, she was married to Charlie Crow. When they would drink, he would beat her up, right? Then my grandmother was also beaten by her husband, then my mom, and then me. And it's almost like it's embedded in our DNA, that trauma. So now science has proven what we knew all along, that we carry our ancestors inside of our body right now. And we don't only carry the resilience, but we also carry the pain. So
yeah,
in our way, how we help that is through our ceremonies, through our medicines, through our songs, through that drum, and those ways to help heal. Because when we're doing our healing, we're not only healing our future, but we're also healing our past. And that's one of our beliefs, hey? That's one of our values. That's one of our the way we think, right? And with our language. So I do believe that when I think about when I fell into family violence, and I remember being a little girl hiding in the closet, hiding my sister, holding her ear so she wouldn't hear, praying to Creator that my dad doesn't kill my mom, my stepdad, and thinking, geez, when I grow up, no man's ever going to hit me. And then it happened. My first relationship, it happened with my son's dad. And I remember thinking, how come, why would I never thought I could go through that. So it really took a lot of effort for me to get out of it, right?
Yeah.
And I started working at the Native Women Shelter, now Awutan.
Yeah.
And I was 22 years old. And I remember thinking, I can't work here because I've been abused. But I remember that at that time, they said, no, you belong here because you have the experience to help other women, because you chose to leave, right? So I think learning that at a young age, and not beating myself up, thinking, why did I go through that? Well, now it makes
Mhm.
sense with intergenerational trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you really hit it on, when
Mhm.
you talked about calling on our ancestors and looking at, how science are kind of, in our DNA. I mean, like that is really amazing, to know that because like, thank you for that viewpoint because I haven't looked at it that way, and because there is generational trauma or family violence in families I know and I've seen where it continues and um, but I think for me I've always believed in that we have the power to stop if we want uh, to help ourselves and to seek that help because I do know of many women who stay in these relationships, abusive relationships, because it. I could say, what? How come you just don't leave him? Well, it's so much more complicated than that, and
Mhm.
I understand how women who are in these relationships, it's not that easy. You can't just get up and go when there's so many factors around that. So I want to make that point, that it's oftentimes it's not that easy. And they usually say, I think they say, according, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a woman will leave her abuser 15 times before she finally leaves.
Mhm.
So like that's how difficult it could be for a lot of women. And so we see a lot of women that maybe just stay because maybe they're not really sure, you know there's maybe they feel stuck or in that. But I always like to offer hope that like your story is offering many women hope. So I thank you for sharing that and being open with your journey here with family violence. So yeah, thank you for that. Janice, what are your thoughts on that
Well,
intergenerational cycle?
with the family violence, yeah, I really believe that is true because if you see the passing of way back then when you're seeing
Mm-hmm.
somebody beating up and now it's passed down and that behavior is there, but I also really believe that you can break that cycle
Mm-hmm.
and through the help of our traditional ways. The reason I'll share a little bit of my story was when I experienced that I left to BC and
Mm-hmm.
there I met a lady. It was really unique how I met her. Didn't know anybody and I was on the I was looking for a place and I just so happened to get on the SkyTrain and I met her because she said she felt. So she off came and she told me, come with me to have coffee. So this lady brought me through the healing through our traditional ways and
Mm-hmm.
really learning the value of how it is for us to be um,
Mm-hmm.
as First Nation women, and then taking me through learning how to, using the energy through the trees, the river,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 that healing was there. And if we can only teach our people our way of healing, I'm sure that a lot of our women can break that cycle by giving them the resources and giving that hope that
Mm-hmm.
there is a better life on there. Because I know being in a in an abusive situation, you have no hope. So sometimes
Mm-hmm.
you're just there. Sometimes, there's women that have no family support or no
Mm-hmm.
place to go. But if they know the resources, so I think we have to start being more louder in regarding talking about family violence for among women. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we talk about the intergenerational curse, I mean, not curse, intergenerational trauma, it's there. And we have to teach our young people how to break that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and I really like what you said, Karen, regarding about the DNA. That is so. That's really amazing to hear that. So thank you for sharing that. So
Yes, that's awesome. So the other thing I want to, and maybe this will be our last discussion, it's around the violence and health of women. So in the report, it says a significant theme across the literature is the relation between family violence and individuals. Family violence and individuals, family and community health and well-being. So one study found that family violence was seen as the #1 health concern among Indigenous women in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Numerous health effects of family violence have been documented, including but not limited to physical injuries such as broken bones, burns, bruises, and injuries resulting in death, as well as sexual and reproductive health impacts, such as unplanned pregnancies, low birth weight babies, lost pregnancies, and sexually transmitted diseases, urinary tract and bladder infections, mental health affecting including the depression, anxiety, diminished self-esteem, and a sense of security, self-harm, substance abuse, eating, and sleep disorders, and suicide attempts. So in particular, the impact of family violence on mental health has been recognized. So mental health discourses frequently individualize the health impacts of domestic violence, with increased rates of mental health disorders being seen as an outcome of abuse. So what are your thoughts about, you know, the violence and the family violence and the impact on the health of not only the women, but maybe even the children and the whole family unit?
Um, well, I believe that family violence affects us mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at my own childhood and um, what I learned about family, I remember doing a talk a few years ago, and I was like, you know, I didn't have those role models. And one of our traditional ways of teaching our children is through role modeling. We role
Mm-hmm.
model healthy families. But when you grow up without having that role modeling, and the role modeling that you have is family violence, the outcome of that is depression,
Mm-hmm.
codependency, lack of self-worth. So it's a ripple effect in terms of our own mental wellness and what we believe we're worth. I mean, it affects every part of our being. And when you can recognize that you are worth something. Because so for me, I've been on a healing journey from the time I was 22 years old, and I'm still learning today.
Yeah,
You know,
me
I
too.
realize I don't
Yeah.
know
yeah.
anything. I'm still learning. But the one thing that I do know for sure is that we have it in our DNA, in our mind, in our body to make change. We can create the life that we want. And that's the message I want to tell our young women
Mhm.
and men. We can change all of that. We have it in our
Mhm.
ability. We have it in our songs and our ceremonies that we can change, because we're already seeing change. We're seeing hope.
Mhm.
I've met so many young people recently, the millennials. They're
Yeah,
so awesome.
Hmm.
they are.
They're total, they'll say whatever needs to be said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just excites me. They like when I was growing up as a youth, we never hardly talked,
Yeah.
but these young ones, they're talking. They're
Yeah.
putting us in our place, and they're telling us how it is. We have two 13-year-old twins, and they're apart from some Tatina, and their dad's part Sixiga too, and then Bigani. Those twins will just tell you how it is. It's like,
Hmm.
whoa, these young people are true, they're born leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I really see there's change and hope. We're already
Mhm.
starting to plant. They said it takes 7 generations to make change.
Mhm.
Well, we're there. We're making
Mhm.
change. I see it.
Mhm.
I have hope. Yeah.
Yes, I do too. Yeah. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Janice?
Well, I know with family violence, it does affect you in all the areas that Karen had said. But it also affects the children and then the unborn. So a lot of the women do not eat properly. So there's a lot of health issues there, which can lead to diabetes and cancer. But over the summer, I worked with some youth, and some of them are just totally, they just tell you how it is, and they tell us what we're doing wrong. For a example, there was one girl said that with chief and council, the leadership, they need to change that, because that was way back in. You guys need to change and start doing this kind, and just telling me things that they had all the ideas, and I thought, wow, these are, yeah, they're leaders, just like with my grandkids. Do something wrong, they don't beat around the bush, they just tell me right out. So yeah, and so I always believe there's hope. I'm always optimistic in everything that that when I'm working with people, I really believe they can change. But I also always tell them that the change is there. There's your support system here. You got the resources, but now it's up to you to change. Change doesn't happen overnight, but if you take baby steps, those changes will happen. And that's the same thing with family violence. With this over the summer, we talked a lot about the bullying and the family violence, and teaching women that you don't need to be in that situation. We talked about addictive relationships. You don't jump from one relationship doesn't work. Take that time to heal. Don't jump from relationship to relationship and that codependency. So those were some of the things that we really focused on, having that awareness for both the male and the females of these young people. So yeah.
So do you think that, I know October here in Alberta, they had the Family Violence Month in the month of November. We had October 4th is the National Day of Action for Missing and Murdered Women. The National Inquiry was released in June of 2019. So, and most recently, December 4th was the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women, was as a result of the shooting that took place in Montreal, as you recall. So I think for me that in the change, we're talking about some of the ways that we could change how we view family violence, and how do we start to make changes in those area. And being 68 to be women, what are some of the things you would like to see happen within our communities?
Okay. This can be a little political, but well, I really think just being Blackfoot woman, the equality between our Blackfoot men and women, like we see there's something there. Europeans call it a patriarchal society that we supposedly live in. I really believe that we were not patriarchal. I really believe that it was the women, like all across Turtle Island, women were always the givers of life, and they had that respect. I really think that an outcome on our Blackfoot people that came from the European culture and the way they treat their women, somehow we adopted that into our ceremonies and our way. And I think that education has to start happening, and we have to say something as Blackfoot women, and that you know what, no, doesn't work that way. That I believe there is more equality, because there's some injustices there that we need to start talking about, because sometimes we don't say things, but we need to start saying things. So that's what I've seen in our Blackfoot community. that
Mm-hmm.
we need to go back to honoring our women and remembering
Mm-hmm.
that the women are the givers of life. And the word patriarchal doesn't set right in my soul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Janice?
Well, yeah, we need to start honoring not only but practicing some of the things like when a young girl starts her monthlies. That's a special where she's coming into as a young lady, not a woman but a young lady. I mean, that's how
Mm-hmm.
I was taught, was to
Mm-hmm.
um, just a minute. And so those traditional things we need to teach our young women, but we also need to start being more vocal on family
Mm-hmm.
violence. When there's family violence week, and that, as a Treaty 7 confederation, as all the Bikanese standoff and Gistunon, we need to start pulling together, not where they're separate, but having a huge stand for family violence whenever it has to do with the murder and missing
Mm-hmm.
women, the family violence that's happening, the bullying that's happening. When these kind of things come up, we need to have a strong stand on that. And we need to start training our young people to be leaders. When I say
Mm-hmm.
leaders, if you look at our history, it was the women the men went hunting and they protected, but it was the women who made sure that the home was, the teepee was, everything was prepared, the meals, everything was done.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at how the strength, how we are as women, how, empowered as women we were back then. And we need to teach our people. And through, like, even right now, I'm thinking, through, there could be this, something happening with the Zoom, talking with
Mm-hmm.
different groups from Bikani and that. So we
Yeah.
need to start working that
Yeah.
and teaching our young people.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree. Yeah. I think it's
and
important to, I was going to say, Jan, I think it's important that we, why this topic, I think we've just really only like skimmed the layer. We
Mhm,
can go so much more deeper into this discussion,
mhm,
and I think we will as time. And you talked about some of the political. So one of the things I will be discussing on the talk show is we're going to talk about politics too. So maybe I'll invite you guys back to be a part, and we'll get into it again. But I think
yeah,
right now I think there's so much. We just need to start talking, and I think that's one of the reasons why Red Women Talk is here, is to really begin to voice our concerns and what because things need to start to change for our communities, and voice. I've always said use your voice, and be the voice, and to help make change and make our communities a better place to live, and for our children too as well. So do you have any last, I know, do you have any last comments that you want to give, and before we end the show? Karen, I
Um,
think, oh yeah, Karen?
yeah. Okay. Well, I really think that the importance of when we know better, we do better, and sharing our stories, unity, huge, especially amongst our Blackfoot
Yes.
people, amongst all Indigenous people. Unity is the
Mm-hmm.
key to us surviving.
Mm-hmm.
The silos that have been created due to the outcomes of colonization. When
Mm-hmm.
we have silos, we have more family violence. When we have
Mm-hmm.
unity, we can actually support each other so much more. This whole
Mm-hmm.
breakdown of Indigenous people across Turtle Island, us not working together within our own communities, like within my own community, Bikani, there's silos. We're not working
Mm-hmm.
together.
Yes.
So for me, in order for us to really move forward as a people, we need to
Mm-hmm.
create better unity and
Yes.
voicing it and saying, hey, we have to connect again. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
really happy that we're able to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Janice, any final comments?
I think one of the things, I think one of the things that I would really like us as Treaty 7 is to have our own Indian association, Women's Indian Association, because I know that a lot of our money goes up north, but a lot of times we don't have the funds to take people up there transportation. We need to form one here where that we have each of our all the areas in our Treaty 7. And when you talk about unity, well, there you're building unity. You're building people and people working together and trying to find ways where we can help our women. And the more we support each other, the more knowledge we get. And so with that, like just talking about it is just on the surface, but there's so much more work we can do. But we first need to work as a unit, you know, unity and building each other up. And appreciating each other and making sure and really believing that there is hope and there is change that is going to happen. And I always believe in that. And I always believe in my prayer. Although we're having these problems, I always say we're going to change. We're going to change to a point where we're, maybe I may not see it in this, but in the near future, people will change and people will, because our young people now are really wanting and grasping that knowledge. They want to know our language. They want to know the history. They want to know stories. And so I worked with some youth last 2 weeks ago in regards to in the evening. They asked me if I could do something like that. And it was really neat. And they're crying. Our young people our young women are asking for these things. So now as women that know this knowledge, we need to start teaching our young people and being the role models. Because I really believe that each and every one of us has something to offer and a unique gift that we can offer to our women. And some of us has experienced that, and we use that stories in our journey to encourage them that there is a light at the end. So thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, ladies. I so enjoyed. I could sit here and have tea in Bannock with you guys like for hours and hours. And maybe one day we will soon and have more discussions. But I thank you, women. You women are doing amazing work in your communities, and I want to acknowledge you to continue to, just to continue the good work, because you're there for a reason. I always believe that we're put in these positions for a reason, and continue the good work for our communities. So I thank you for the time you've given us for Red Women Talk, and I look forward to have you back on the show in the near future, and maybe hopefully it would be we'll be together and not have to speak through computers and stuff, but for me preferably. But so take care, and we will talk to you again soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to see you, Karen.
Yes, you too.
Yeah.